Hi, I think we can get started. Welcome everyone, thank you for joining. I'm Matos, I'm the marketing manager of VisionMobile, and I'd like to welcome you to this developer economics webinar. Today we'll present key findings from our latest published developer economics report called State of the Developer Nation Q1 2015. Our main speaker for today is none other than our very own Andreas Constantinou, the CEO and founder of VisionMobile. Today, Andreas is going to present key findings from the latest State of the Developer Nation report, discussing main trends and key insights. The presentation is going to run for around 20 minutes, and then we'll have a 10-minute Q&A session with questions from the audience, so please stay tuned. Please write any questions you have on the chat window of the control panel. We won't be able to address them all, perhaps, but we'll try to answer any questions we don't have time for via email. So let's get started. Andrea, over to you.
So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Andreas Constantinou. I'm here to present the State of the Developer Nation. We've been running this for a long time, since 2010, and roughly every 6 months we poll the global developer audience for key insights, key developer metrics, if you like, platforms, revenues, languages, enterprise versus consumer, tools, and lots of other things. We release a sizable amount of data for free as part of these State of the Developer Nation reports. This is our 8th State of the Developer Nation report, and comes from the data we captured back in October 2014 from one of the largest ever mobile developer surveys, 8,000 plus mobile and IoT developers. So for today's presentation, I've not just taken some of the data from that report, but also a few data points from our EU App Economy report, from our app forecast report, and also from our IoT developer and platform landscape report. So lots of insights coming up. Stay tuned. And a quick intro to VisionMobile. Although most of you should be aware, we are an analyst company featured or focused 100% on the developer economy. We've been doing that for the longest. Since 2010, we've been tracking trends and developer attitudes in the app economy. We run the largest globally surveys. We understand developer segments from hobbyists to enterprise IT, helping companies create ecosystems, create winning ecosystems. And so, as a reminder, the insights in this webinar come from the State of the Developer Nation Q1 2015 report. This report is available to all Developer Economics community members, and I'll give you a link at the end of this webinar where you can download the report with all the insights. This again comes from a survey of over 8,000 mobile and IoT, that is Internet of Things developers. Again, biggest developer research, and the 8th edition of our developer waves. So let's move on to the insights. I'll first talk about the numbers, the revenue numbers. So we have seen most of the blogosphere and internet talk to date about app stores, and in some cases about ads, and in some cases about contract development, but we see very, very clearly the rise of e-commerce. And this is not just e-commerce as a revenue model. This is really signifying that mobile and apps are changing from a product to a channel. So just about every e-commerce or physical commerce company is developing an app and therefore using the app to increase their revenues. So all in all, we find that the e-commerce contributions to the app economy will rise to about $300 billion this year, or 2.5 times of all other revenue sources combined. Coming second is App Store sales for a total of $40 billion, which is slow growing, and mobile advertising will grow rapidly, although I'll discuss more about mobile advertising in a few slides. This is the picture of revenues. This is a chart showing you the area, and area is proportional to total app economy revenues, and you see literally how big e-commerce sales is as part of the entire app economy compared to the relatively smaller or much smaller app store sales. And as I mentioned, everybody talks about app stores and winners and losers in app stores, and developers fighting for the chart positions, but actually we see that the biggest opportunity is in e-commerce applications. And we only see a very small comparatively number of developers building apps with an e-commerce revenue model, and so we ask, where are all the e-commerce developers gone? This is clearly an opportunity far bigger than just trying to get rich quick on the App Store. It's just no longer the gold rush that it used to be. Looking at different cuts of the global app economy, we compare here the number of app developers. We estimate the number of app developers at 5.7 million, and that is everyone from hobbyists to enterprise IT. Most of the growth is coming outside from Europe, primarily Asia. And we released a report, I think a couple of months ago, which talks about the sizing of app developers by region, by platform, by revenue model, and much, much more. We also released an EU app economy report where we did a dive into some of the countries in Europe, and we looked at number of jobs by country and also jobs concentration or job share as a percentage of total employment. We see UK is very active, should come as no surprise, and Israel is even more active with 3.4% of Israel jobs being app economy jobs, which is pretty phenomenal. Moving on to a topic that should be familiar to many, platform wars. And we've long been saying for at least 2 or 3 years that we see no change in the concentrated landscape, or aka the duopoly. And every release of our report, we see that conviction become more and more crystallized. And so in the latest report, we say that the platform wars have ended in a stalemate. There is no further option. There's no further moves that we expect for application development platforms. Pretty much iOS owns the entire premium segment, and Android owns almost everything else. iOS is particularly strong in China, a second biggest country for iOS sales, even if China is primarily dominated by Android developers and Android devices. And as you'd expect, Windows and browser fight for, we call it here the scraps, but essentially fight for the single-digit market share. There's much more detail and color here. I would draw your attention to the bottom left chart, where we see the platform that is preferred for full-time professionals. Full-time professionals means those developers that are professionals and work full-time on apps. And we see that Android and iOS have got, over the last few runs of the survey, they got nearly 80% of all those developers, which is where all the wonderful apps are coming from. Windows Phone is steadily increasing, but we don't see that breaking through unless they somehow miraculously manage to do what we call a vertical mountain climb. But it's looking likely that Microsoft will have a dedicated following of developers, given their very strong tool set, given their much higher chances of succeeding as a developer within the Windows marketplace. But we question whether that very small, whether that market is really worth Microsoft's continued subsidy of Windows Phone. And we've also seen Microsoft adopt a horizontal approach, which is completely contrary to the Ballmer era vertical approach, by releasing over 100 native apps, native Microsoft apps for iOS and Android. The other thing which is notable here is the split between East and West in terms of primary platforms. So in North America and Europe, the lead primary platform is iOS. In the rest of the world, it's clearly Android. So iOS and Android is premium segments versus reach, and it's East versus West. And that seems to be a fairly safe prediction for at least the next 12 months. Moving on to languages now, we've seen a near miraculous rise of Swift to 20% of mobile developers. That's from 0% of mobile developers, 4 months since launch. And being associated with Apple, you might be tempted to take that for granted, but actually, if you compare it with Google's Go and Facebook's Hack, both back-end languages, the growth and adoption is really phenomenal. So for comparison, Google went from 0 to 5% mindshare, in other words, use of that platform by mobile developers within 5 years. And Swift accomplished 20% in just 4 months. Now, what's more interesting is who are those Swift developers? And at the bottom, firstly, you see the breakdown of language mindshare on the device side and the server side. Green in that chart is for mindshare, i.e. developers using. Blue is primary use of the language. And you see that 20% Swift. In red, of course, very few are using Swift as a primary language because too many frameworks are still written in Objective-C, and you need to rely on Objective-C, not just Swift, for most iOS apps. Now, if you compare Objective-C, which even when it was introduced in 2000 and in the iPhone, it was introduced in 2007, but it existed much longer on the Mac. It took them 7 years to get to that 39%, and so it's just phenomenal that Swift rose so quickly. On the server side, you see PHP leading, which is relatively speaking a dated language, but at the same time it's being used by a very, very large number of not just mobile developers but also back-end developers, given that WordPress, for example, is written on PHP, and WordPress is the most popular website software in use. What's also interesting in this chart is the breakdown of who those Swift developers are coming from. So in the middle circle, what you see is where those Swift developers are coming from by Objective-C use. So 20%, 29% were using Objective-C before. 48% were using Objective-C, but not as primary. In other words, it was their secondary language. Now look at that maybe sand-colored top left segment of the circle, which is that 23%, and these are developers who were not previously using Objective-C but now are using Swift. And this basically says that Swift is opening up Apple's app development to a whole new breed of developers. And those are also using Swift. So of course they will take time for Swift to be a mainstream language, but in short, the adoption is phenomenal, opens up Apple to many non-Apple developers, and will take some time to before it can become fully standalone without relying on Objective-C as a second language for developers. Now let's go back to revenues and look at how much money developers are actually making. So on iOS, we see polarization, and it's not as bad, nowhere as bad as Android. So we see that 37% of developers are prioritizing 37% of developers that prioritize iOS are below the app poverty line. The app poverty line we draw at the $500 mark per month on iOS. And at the same time, on the opposite end of the scale, 39% of developers make more than $5,000 per month on iOS platform. So very much a polarization. You see lots more color here. If I can explain how to read those charts, on the top right you have monthly revenues by primary platform, and you see the greener the better, essentially. So the more green it means the more money per month is made by those developers. And you see how the second biggest grossing platform, if you like, in terms of developer revenues is mobile browser, followed by Android, followed by BlackBerry, followed by Windows Phone and Windows 8. Now this also has to do not just with the pure money potential of the platform, but also the segment of developers, and I'll talk about segments in a bit. But Windows Phone attracts an overwhelming number of hobbyists and explorers who are developers who primarily care about fun and learning opportunities and less so about the money. What's also interesting, and I'd like to draw your attention here, is that on the the bottom right chart, you see that developers who prioritize iOS do better on other platforms too, not just iOS. If you look carefully at the numbers, you'll find that developers who prioritize iOS end up making more money on Android than those who prioritize Android. And this should make sense because it's those developer and software houses that have really gained the art and mastered the art of apps, have got several titles and are cross-promoting across the titles, have a respectable user base, and are in pure growth mode rather than trying to get rich quick through opportunist apps. Another very, very interesting element of the app economy, and one where we've invested a significant amount of research, is in Internet of Things. And Internet of Things is not just a buzzword, but it's so phenomenal even for us. We were surprised to see such phenomenal number of product launches and investments by not just companies in mobile, but companies who are flirting with developers in mobile in several verticals. And we see already that 53% of mobile developers are working on an IoT project, which is a very, very large percentage. And in terms of most popular verticals, we have smart home with 37% of mobile developers, followed by wearables at a close second. Connected car and other verticals have a much less mindshare. And all this data comes from our IoT developer and platform landscape report, which we just released a couple of weeks ago. And I'll give you the website URL if you are interested in that report at the end of the presentation. This is one of the slides from that report, what I like to call a logo salad, but it's one that has plenty of insight, and because it breaks down the business models of IoT vendors breaks down the IoT platform vendors by business model and by vertical. I've omitted the traction that each platform has, which is in our full report. But in short, you see the frenetic activity that's happening on IoT platforms. And this is any developer offering on IoT. This is hardware companies, this is mobile companies, this is platform as a service companies, and it's in all these verticals. And of course, there's many more logos and companies outside these verticals and outside these business models. But the way we break down the business models is whether companies are trying to make money directly from IoT, as in the case of the blue column, versus are trying to make money in another business and using IoT platforms as a way of attracting developers and driving demand for their core business. So we see the orange columns where the future will side with purely because they're not trying to make money from IoT, but they're using IoT as a demand generator for their core business. And if I were to add the developer mindshare numbers here, like which platforms are attracting more attention, you would see a couple of patterns. You would see standards are really the old school way of achieving consensus, and platforms are the new way. You would see that, for example, Android Auto and Apple CarPlay have phenomenally different developer mindshare to MirrorLink, which is a car manufacturer standard. And also you would see that companies coming from established ecosystems like Google with Android Wear and Microsoft with Microsoft Health and Band and Nest with Google Support and so on have phenomenally greater mindshare and developer traction than anything else which is trying to create an ecosystem on its own. Again, this is an excerpt from our IoT developer and platform landscape report. It's available on developereconomics.com, but you can also, if you stay until the end of the presentation, I'm going to give you a link to access. Moving on, tools. Tools has been always a pet subject for us here at VisionMobile because we firmly believe that tools are not just nice to have, they're a fundamental part of the developer arsenal. And so we are happy to see that the level of tool awareness is increasing, meaning that the number of developers not using any third-party tool has dropped to an all-time low of 17%. We continue to see ad networks at the top of the popularity, and with 31% of developers using them. We also see the usual phenomena, which is that use of ad networks is negatively correlated with revenues, and that's because there's a very small space on a screen, irrespective of how many billions of screens there are, and so users are never going to be spending the same effort or interest in looking at those ads, let alone clicking at those ads, and so the monetization with ads is really very, very low unless you are an app with users in the millions or ideally tens and hundreds of millions. We also see cross-platform tool adoption on the rise. We see more developers using cross-platform tools. On the left-hand side, you see a breakdown of the top tool categories, starting with user analytics, ad networks, cross-platform tools, push notifications, and a few other things. You'll probably notice that crash reporting is pretty high. Anything to do with marketing, games, analytics, figuring out how well your app does is fairly popular, and that's because tools are used to increase your chances of getting through to the right user and turning those users into fans. I would also point your attention to the chart on the top right, where you see user analytics is dominated by Google and Android by Google on Android and Flare on iOS. So this comes from a different data set where we basically analyze tens of thousands of applications, and we figure out what tooling is being used to produce those applications, and we track the top tools in each of these two platforms. You see a very different breakdown on iOS and Android. Again, Flare dominates on iOS, and Google Analytics dominates on Android. Moving on, for the sake of brevity, let's look at enterprise versus consumer. Again, as with previous surveys, we see that 43% of enterprise developers make a substantial amount of money, 10K per month, versus 19% of consumer app developers reaching the same revenue level. And some might argue that, you're obviously suggesting that we do enterprise apps, but these will take substantial amount of time to go get to the right person in the corporation. We'll spend a ton of time doing business development, and so it's not as easy as you might think it is. Well, I would also paint the same picture for consumer apps. And if you look at the amount of money you have to spend to be on the charts, it's just phenomenal. We're talking about minimum of 100,000 per month in marketing, advertising, promotions, and so on for apps in order to make it to the charts. It's really those that have money will spend, will get on the charts. Those that don't will not. We cite another typical rule of thumb here that a game is typically giving a third of gross revenue to the App Store provider and then spending half of what's left on advertising to acquire new users. So the bar is really high for consumer apps to get noticed, and it all happens with very classic advertising. There's more data points here. You see the top 5 categories of enterprise versus consumer apps. You see the revenue breakdown of the share of developers making a substantial amount of money on enterprise versus consumer apps, and you see the significant focus on the browser for enterprise apps, which should come as expected because of the focus of enterprises on reusing existing content that's usually HTML based. Finally, I talk about segments. At VisionMobile, we've long focused and sharpened our understanding of developer segments, and we're the first to pioneer, and as far as I know, only company that's using a psychographic model and not looking at skills or demographics or educational level, but looking at really why developers make commitments, spend time, effort, money into a platform, into an API, into a tool set. And so we've modeled our 8-segment segmentation model based on these principles. And we see that the platform choices made by segments characterize those segments almost completely. So, for example, iOS has very, very few hobbyists, but just about 50% of hunters and guns from hire, in other words, the money-motivated developers. And a massive 55% of Windows Phone first developers are hobbyists and explorers. And if you look at the Windows Phone store, you actually see that reflected in the type of apps that are there. But in short, these are the 8 type of segments. We've described them in our reports again and again. Over the years, we published a report on developer segmentation back 2 months ago, called Developer Segmentation 2014. And in this chart, we also show the share of developers in each OS in each segment. So Android-first developers, as you might expect, there's a substantial share of hobbyists and explorers, but a decent amount of money makers. Contrast this with Windows, that is primarily hobbyists and explorers. Contrast this with iOS, that is primarily hunters and guns for hire, the money-making segments. It's only web that is fairly nicely balanced across the segments. This is the link that I've been referring to across the presentation. You can download the State of the Developer Nation report by going to developereconomics.com/go. This is a free download for members of our Developer Economics community. It's a free sign-up to become a member of that community. And on the left-hand side of the slide, you see the report that I was talking to you about, IoT Developer and Platform Landscape. It's a completely jam-packed with insights on over 4,000 Internet of Things developers and over 50 platforms competing for developer attention in Internet of Things. You will be soon uploading our latest report, which is on IoT Megatrends 2015, and so it takes a business model view on what are the longer-term trends that will define the winners and losers in Internet of Things. This wraps up our presentation. You can see my email address and phone number here. My Twitter handle is Andreas CON, so Andreas CON, and we're in the business of tracking developer trends. If this is relevant, please reach out. And for now, I'd like to open the webinar to any questions from the audience.
So if you have any questions, please write them on the chat window below. Thank you, James, for your kind words.
Thank you for the comment, James.
Do we have any questions? Andrea, while we wait, perhaps it might be interesting to discuss how a couple of key trends have evolved since a couple of years ago, since we've been doing this for a long time and tracking trends for a long time.
Yeah. One of my favorite trends since last week, we spend a considerable amount of time and footsteps, if you like, at Barcelona, the Mobile World Congress show, where there were over 90,000 people there from across the mobile industry and beyond the mobile industry. And there's a couple of really clear trends emerging around Internet of Things. And so let me quickly highlight those. So everybody talks about in IoT, but IoT is really not about Internet, it's not about things. The value is not in devices, it's not in sensors, it's not in connectivity. So for connectivity, that might come naturally for you, but devices, let me explain it this way, that whatever application you want to develop, let's say traffic application, there's a multitude of sensors and data sources you can use. You can use street cameras, you can use sensors, physical sensors that you buy and place on the street, you can use you can buy data from Waze, you can even use Wi-Fi signals and cell signals and lots of other sources. So there's no unique sensors, and that's why there's no unique devices, and as such we see that the value in IoT is upwards, and it's even higher than devices, it's higher than services. It's in the data platforms. It's in the platforms that will allow you to connect devices and get them to talk to each other, get them to define and derive use cases that were previously hard to find or even unimaginable. And all of these use cases will come from developers, people that are likely to take the risk of experimenting with how devices are going to talk with each other. So it's not about Internet, it's not about things, it's about data and developers. And I see we have a couple of questions. So I'll just address them. There's a question if adoption of things like Cordova PhoneGap are mitigating the need to develop natively. No, they're not. Partially for certain classes of apps, in some cases for enterprise apps because of the use of HTML5 there. You'll also always see that if you want to develop a competitive app that has a compelling UX and responsiveness, you will be spending, roughly speaking, 60 or 70% of your code base on a shared cross-platform approach, such as Cordova, and another 30% developing natively and optimizing for each OS. Titanium is another one. I see it's mentioned in another question, but practically speaking, there's only two platforms that companies care about, iOS and Android. So if you have workforce trained in particular language like C# or like HTML5, or you have assets in that language, then of course it makes sense to use a cross-platform framework, but it's definitely not the panacea that some think they are. You always have to combine cross-platform with native to get to that near native experience or full native experience. There's another question about going through the list. The process of bringing apps to consumer market, the $100K month market spend is a fascinating statistic. Yeah, in turn I heard this from a marketing agency. These are the budgets. They are comfortable having their clients spend with them. I consider this to be a sign of the times, really. Wherever you see in any FMCG market, you will see companies with big budgets go on the billboards, go on TV, go on radio, go on large web promotions and so on. So if you have the money, you can go and spend it in marketing. You can get on consumers' minds. If you don't, then you have to struggle with getting that Flappy Bird app exactly right at the exact right time. It's just no longer the gold rush that it used to be. If you want to have a to be an appreneur, if you like, to make money on the app economy, the safest approach is to become a contractor and a specialized one, and get your friends involved and just grow very quite predictably, I would say. I've seen so many friends and colleagues I know build small contract development shops, and some of them are doing it very well. For example, Novoda in the UK is doing very well as an Android specialist shop. They're now at over 30 people just doing Android and nothing else than Android, but doing it very, very well. Somebody else is asking, have you seen appreneurs adopting lean MVP strategies? I don't think there is enough attention on that particular approach. I think we need more bloggers, we need more entrepreneurs apply lean startup approaches to apps. Right now it's happening by a combination of techniques like beta testing tools and smarter prototyping tools that allow you to share early prototypes of the app with your user base. They have to do with very sophisticated use of user analytics, and that's not easy to do. You have the probes. You can insert the user analytics SDK into your app, but then actually what you measure and how you measure it and how you draw your conclusions and you learn and you build and use and so on, it's much harder. So there's no kind of, I would say, school of thought specifically adapted to apps, and I think we should be seeing more of that, more of growth hacking for app devs. more of MVP strategies for app devs. And I think that should cover all of the questions. Just wait,
I think, Andrea, we have a question also on Africa, and what does it hold for mobile ads enthusiasts, particularly investors?
Well, Africa is waking up, digitally speaking, and the entrepreneurship culture there is much stronger than in Europe, definitely. I think we also hear from clients who are interested in, building up developer programs in Africa as they see more and more entrepreneurship and app developers from Africa or for Africa. I think it's a very logical result of Africa getting reliable bandwidth connectivity and being a huge continent with steadily growing share of Android handsets. I see that it will be one of the major focus areas for developer programs going forward. And I see a final question here before we wrap up. Any thoughts on whether existing apps are going to rush to provide Apple Watch functionality? My guess is no. I see the watch as primarily serving to A, tell you what time it is, B, show off that you have a nice watch. In other words, the classic reasons for wearing a watch. Now, Apple is trying to change all that, saying that you really wear a watch because you want to figure out what's happening with your phone. I think there is a massive education needed to get people to change such a traditional kind of use case for watches. Massive as in the size of there's an app for that campaign. And I see the watch or the connected watches being existing or traditional kind of digital, non-digital watches with sensors. And so I believe the biggest use case long-term for watches is as a fitness tracker, health tracker. And the value in that is obviously not in the watch, but in the data that the watch sends to whatever platform or service or ecosystem that goes to. So I think I would dare prediction that the Apple Watch will stay niche because it's just too cumbersome or too expensive to re-educate consumers that the watch is so that you can figure out what's happening with your smartphone. I think it should be the other way around.
Okay, I think we can wrap up here.
And with that, we can wrap up.
So thank you all for attending this webinar. Hope you enjoyed it and you found the insights useful. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at matos@visionmobile.com or andreas@visionmobile.com. So thank you all and goodbye for now.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.